Hello, everybody in gender fair language. Welcome to this panel, The Invisible Ones. I am Leandrinha Duarte. I am a white woman, long hair, and it's green. And behind me, there is a pink background. I am 26 years old. I am militant of the LGBT movement and people with special need, and I have become the face and the reference of the fight for sexuality, for people with special need and LGBT. I take theology, researcher in philosophy, columnist of Media Ninja. It's a big pleasure to be here today leading this panel. And today we are going to talk about the invisibilization of LGBT people, indigenous, Black refugees, and people with special need. An initiative of the Canadian government in association with the Association of the LGBT Pride Parade in São Paulo. And today we have the support of Beatitudes in the sign language interpretation and Prisma simultaneous translation in Portuguese, English, and Spanish. In order to put up this panel that is beautiful with me, I have Janet, an indigenous person, two-spirited, renowned artist, Canadian artist.
Recording in progress.
Kimahi Powell, Executive Director in Canada, Rainbow Railroad. Natasha Steinberg, Director of Experience of Diversity in the City of Buenos Aires, Argentina, multi-artist, João Nin, Brazilian, and Javiera Zuniga, the spokesperson of the NGO Movil in Chile. In order to start this conversation, I'd like to talk to Janet. It's not a secret that in Brazil, there was a plan to kill the indigenous people. That was the indigenous, using the assimilation, the forced assimilation of the religions and the costumes of the colonizer white men. These costumes changed the religion, the language, and the culture of many indigenous communities. And this affected as well LGBTQ2 plus people. In our indigenous community in Canada, I ask you to explain, please, what is a two-spirited person? We are not so familiar with this term here in Brazil. But I would like to know about the religion effect of two-spirited people and LGBT in general and their role in society. João, for you, I ask you to complement about your vision and this influence also in the indigenous community in Brazil and how this has affected LGBT people. Please, welcome.
Chue, hola, and thank you, Leandra, for being our host today. I'm very excited to be here. You could see that I have a photograph of my homelands, which is more than 35 kilometers away because I actually live in downtown Toronto. But I'm happy to have the rainforest behind me of my ancestors to ground this important conversation. I'm going to speak in my language and interpret it so the interpreters aren't stressed. Uklasis Janet Aquayakshil Ahausit Aksu New Channels At Umixu Stella August Nanixu Idaswan Augustish Tatnes Ocean Tea Talson. So I just told you that I'm a daughter, a granddaughter, a mother of three, only taller than one. And I come from very far away and live here in Toronto now. And when you ask me what two-spirit identity is, I identify as a two-spirit woman. And you have to keep in mind, we're using the enemy's tongue. And I'm not saying that Indigenous people are having a conflict or have like English or any colonizer's tongue, they're not our enemy. But when we speak with a colonizer's tongue, the colonizer has defined Indigenous peoples as the enemy. So when I use the colonizer's tongue, two-spirit is the closest thing I could translate as a way to identify myself as a woman who prefers the company of women. I'm lesbian, I prefer women. And this term is fairly new in Canada. It came about in the late 80s and 90s, as I understand it, because what we were also finding out was that the Indigenous community didn't feel represented by the LGBTQ group of letters. And so two-spirit allows us to remember that Indigenous peoples who identify their sexuality as two-spirit walk in both worlds. We all have male-female DNA. And I remember a good friend saying, go where the heat is. Just, I think part of what's happened with your question linked to religion and the impact that has had on two-spirit identity is that one of the things that religion has had the superpower to do is forget our humanity. And this is an image that pops around this time of year that reminds us that we're all skeletons underneath this good-looking packaging. And our identities are part of that sense of packaging. But at the end of the day, we're still human beings. And what happens in history is that we have a domino of this attitude of religion that you're describing that goes back to 1492. Does that date sound familiar to anybody? 1492, we've all been raised with this propaganda that Christopher Columbus discovered like the Americas when really he was lost, and you can't discover something that's not missing, right? We've never been missing. You can't discover something that wasn't missing. We didn't need to be found. We were already here, and he never made it this far. But Christopher Columbus gets all this important historical people hold him up, and that's the beginning of the religious conversation, because more important than 1492 is 1493, when Columbus has a conversation with the Pope. And the Pope says, if you find any more new lands without Christians, you can claim it in the name of God. So the devil didn't show up until Christopher Columbus did. And all the sin that goes with two-spirit identity, because Indigenous populations did not have sin before 1492. But the Pope said, if you find new lands, so dehumanize people, if you're not Christian, you're evil, you're pagan, you're heathen, you're soulless. You need to be saved. No, I don't. My mom didn't marry, and so I'm pure pagan, because my mom didn't even bother getting married. I married 3 times because I thought I was supposed to, because I grew up in a white world. So just to change the conversation back to everybody else in the panel, I think I just wanted to start by, really shaping that one of the reasons why we experience more homophobia now as Indigenous people is because of religion, because homophobia comes with religion in often occasions. And not to say all nations might have been accepting, but many nations didn't villainize people for their private lives, because what straight people do is private. What I do as a two-spirit woman is private, and that's our birthright, privacy. I'm nobody's sexy little secret. I have my right to privacy just like everybody else.
That's nice to hear your perception, Janet. Hua, would you like to complement something on that? Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, with Leandrinha, in this forum of the LGBT rights, QI2+. I'm so pleased to get to know Janet. I am from Natal, Rio Grande do Norte, Brazil, indigenous Potiguara, and we are on the corner of the country, of the continent, and we are considered first contact people. And Janet's point of view really complements what we in the indigenous world, we talk about this perspective of genocide, ethnocide of dissidents, bodies such as ours. We are the first contact people. The caravels, the ships came here, the invaders came here, and they have brought monoculture of faith. They have brought the religion, this God, without asking our gods, our costumes, our religions. And they found here bodies, divine bodies, LGBTs in spiritual functions and social functions. And many, many nations were considered divine, sacred bodies. So when they come here with this monoculture of faith, Jesus, and they find competition, and then there's only one God, so our bodies are demonized, are villainized, and we are transformed into evil, demons. So that's hell. And really, this perspective, especially the perspective, manichaeist, of good and evil, was not for all the nations as Christianism. So this was so violent, and we get this heritage of the violence up to today. Last year, I wrote a piece of a script called Tibira, Brazilian tragedy, the indigenous population, talking about Tupinambá indigenous person in 1614 was executed in public space, in a public square, arrested, and he was put in front of a cannon and divided into half. He was accused of sodomy. So the document that we have about his death is from a French priest, Yves Douvreau. And this is a historical character documented in the history of this country and is erased, is hidden, is not remembered, that we do not realize. There is a denounce that our bodies, the way we live, has always been before the colonizers arrived here. So we have here Samobera, Vacunhã, Tibiras, Inhamacói. Inhamacói is a term that Yuandé uses as two-spirited people. Yemokoi, two souls. I believe there is also a dialogue with this term that it was created in 1990 in the north of the continent. I believe that as the Tupi, Potiguara are Tupi people, that the word has a soul. And when we use the word of the colonizers, of the enemy, we are really hiding and killing lots of souls. So it's very important that we recover these terms and inject energy in the things that are internal, because queer, LGBT come from caravels, from ships here. So we are always thinking about what we are and why we have other people that name us, called us black, mixed black, and other names, never asked who we were. If you were indigenous, we did not know indigenous, the word Indian, if you were Potiguar, Krenak, Tabajara, Tupinambá. So I believe that, as Cacauera says, the colonization was a mismatch. They did not see us. And I believe from this point on, we have this role. Everybody look at your other eyes to see us, to ask us, how would you like to be treated, called who you are from our point of view, from our soul. Neném is a soul in Tupi-Guarani. Everything is connected. Wow, that's so powerful to hear you. These two characters that are grandiose, talking about their perspective to us. Religion is always a reason that many people, LGBT, are expelled out of their homes and their countries. Lots of places to be LGBT is a crime, can be punished with death or prison. The choice for many people is to hide, even flee to other places. How many LGBT people left their countries in the last years and went to Canada? What is the biggest complaint that they have when they have to leave their countries? To answer that, I'd like to invite Kimali.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here. I'll be speaking in English. My name is Kamali Powell. I use the pronouns he, him, and his. I am also currently in what we call Tekaronto or Toronto in Canada, home of many nations. One of the interesting things about just continuing this conversation about our work is that we're very mindful of the work at Rainbow Railroad, that we're doing this work advocating for resettlement of LGBTQI refugees on land that is stolen and not claimed, and we factor that into the multiple countries by which we ask people to accept LGBTQI newcomers, and that's a conversation that we're continuously to have around how that intersects with Indigenous voices, and especially as we rip the mask off of the real tension between Canada's humanitarian record and how we perceive ourselves as world leaders, and the fact that there are now hundreds of remains of Indigenous children whose bodies are being found as we speak in societies all across Canada. And so I mentioned that as we claim to be a safe haven for LGBTQI people at risk, that we realize that in order to be truly intersectional and hold to our values that we say for Canadian, we have to really reconcile our human rights atrocities of the past and the present. That's one thing. When we talk about our work and the displacement of LGBTQI people from around the world, and the tensions, I also want to reflect a little bit about this really meaningful conversation around colonization. We talk a lot about the fact that there are 70 countries, 69 to be exact, that criminalize same-sex intimacy. And it's the stigma from those laws that put people at risk. However, it's really important because it's very easy, especially from our supporters as a global North organization, to have the response of well-meaning people from our own LGBTQI community to be, well, these countries are X, or look at these countries who are other because they criminalize folks in the community. And I think we have to reconcile that there are problematic laws on the books that breed persecution, and that those in many countries, especially within the Commonwealth, those laws are a consequence of colonization, that they were imported laws that really manifested criminalization in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Caribbean, and other. And I bring that up as important context to how we actually, what actually is putting people at risk. And of course, criminalization is not the only context to which LGBTQI persons are facing dangerous situation. Brazil, as an example, actually has more protections than others for LGBTQI persons. And we also see a sharp increase of requests for help from trans persons, in particular trans women who are victims of violence and are murdered. And so how do you reconcile in many spaces, places where are tourist destinations for people who are wealthier all the time, but also people who are vulnerable at the same time? Those are the issues that we deal with on a regular basis. For those of you who do not know our organization, Rainbow Railroad mission is to help LGBTQI people facing persecution find safety. We receive about 3,000 to 4,000 requests for help each year from individuals at risk all over the world who are sometimes in imminent danger because of persecution based on their sexual orientation, gender identity expression, or sex characteristics. And what we do is we triage all of those cases. We try to understand what their story of persecution is, how imminent their danger is, and see what we can do to help. I want to be really clear. Our objective, our goal is not people have to leave their country of origin to find safety. I would say most people, if they choose, would want to be in their communities by which they can survive and thrive. But we know for many various factors that that's not possible. And we also do this work because there is a global refugee crisis. And let me be clear, the crisis is not about refugees. The crisis is about a failure of governments to act. There are 80 million displaced people around the world. That's the largest number since the Second World War. And Canada resettled the most number of those refugees in 2019, 2020, and that number was about 20,000. So if you think about the disparity between the scale of the problem and the solutions, it's massive. And LGBTQI people are uniquely vulnerable. They're uniquely vulnerable because while people are fleeing multiple countries due to war, famine, and other situations, LGBTQI people are targeted within those spaces. I'll give you a couple examples in Latin and South America. We know that the intersection with climate and the climate crisis and humanitarian crisis of Venezuela has led many people to leave the country into neighboring countries. LGBTQI people have faced dangerous journeys and are susceptible to gang violence, rape, gender-based violence along those routes. We've also seen that in Central America, in countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and Panama, where people are trying to make the dangerous journey to the United States. And so what we're trying to do ultimately is reflect the fact that people make very dangerous journeys all the time to find safety. And our goal is to help people find those safe paths to any safe haven, including within the country, to keep people safe.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much, very much, for teaching us and presenting us other perspectives. That is very powerful, really powerful indeed. In addition to religion, the state seems to want that LGBT people to adjust to this new normality, a standard of bodies, genders, attitudes, and preferences do not correspond to the standard. Sometimes this person is placed last in the line of rights and access to basic service. In order to fight the invisibilization of LGBT people in the public authorities and bring their voice access to basic rights like any citizen. And then I invite Natasha to answer this question and talk about it. Natasha, welcome. Thank you so much, Leandra, for the presentation and the Embassy of Canada for this invitation. I work with the access of rights for people, LGBT, in the city of Buenos Aires and the government of the city of Buenos Aires. And then we, as Leandra said, that we have a normalized structure. In the last years, here in the city of Buenos Aires, we have seen the state converting into a state that welcomes and listens the claims of the organizations of civil society for many years. They listen to these claims and having cultural transformation that is important to give more visibility and more space in the government, in the state, also outside. In our function as the direction of experience and diversity, we treat about visibility and try to break the system of binary gender, and we fight against what we say, cis, hetero, in order to give place to diversity and voices to different corporalities, different cultures. Our direction ahead, the Subsecretariat of Human Rights, and we work and we articulate with the direction of collectivity, also the immigrants, refugee aspects, and then we work articulating with different areas of the government to understand that what we should bring light and bring more attention, exactly intersectorality. As my friend said, the intersection, when we have problems, they have more vulnerability to people. So we have been working in Buenos Aires, everything related to generate inclusive space, more participative spaces. We have a very important program, Buenos Aires Convive, lives together. When you generate inclusive spaces and we work human rights, diversity topics, sexual diversity, gender diversity, the body energy, the construction of the masculinity, and the communication, inclusive communication that we have here, inclusive language, because we do believe, and it does not make sense to talk about it, yeah? The invisible ones, if you do not name, the person does not exist, and if the person does not exist, does not have rights. That's why it's so important to talk about visibility in the public space and the transformation of language and political communication. So we have been working hard in this program, and then we work in different areas of the government, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Labor, Secretariat of Gender Equality, and Transport as well. And we think about a city to everybody, a city that there is no neighbor hegemonic, but there is diversity everywhere that really represents us all, because every person is different from each other. So that's a way that we have found using this program of bringing visibility, working in different dates in our calendar, in celebration dates, also the qualification for sectors connected to public spaces, intergovernment, private companies, hospitals, in order to raise the awareness and raise the accessibility to rights in all the areas of the city. So the citizenship is really accessible to all. That's a fact, right? That's so crazy to hear this visibility aspect and how this happens in all the places all around the world. Oh, the body that's outside this normativity, that body that's outside the curve of normativity is excluded body, excluded, and that's unfortunately too bad. And now we have a video of Márcio Rolim, journalist LGBT for 15 years, the creator of content, working in big portals, introducing the communication of the gay meeting for 4 years. And today, he is in the G community 40 plus, especially in his channel B40. Let's watch the video, please. The process of visibilization of LGBT people starts early when they are children at home, and then goes to the street, school, adolescence, university, to the adult life in the workplace, and expands when the LGBT gets older. Older people are considered by the society as useless. They work less, they produce less. And if they are LGBTQ, they are people that have less opportunities in the marketplace, less chances of getting retired, saving money, and take positions in the marketplace that can promote their livelihood in old age. When they do not have opportunity, it seems that is aging is poor and dangerous for LGBT. And that's why LGBT people do not live longer, especially trans people. Work, the institution, the authorities do not permit people to have career plan, to have mental health that is well balanced, to plan their future when they get old. There's no need to work as hard at 60, 70, and 80-year-old. We have LGBT people depending on other people so they can survive. They depend financially from other people to get retired for their livelihood. Public policies that embrace these people so they can have a healthy life in the aging process. This will take long time, and we are waiting that the authorities look at LGBT older and say, you are useful, you can be used socially in different aspects, and we need to rethink and think about policies that embrace these people. To become old and LGBT is a double battle on survival. I am Marcio Rolim, B40. We discuss the survival of gay men getting older. Thank you so much, Marcio, for sending us this video. And one more perspective, that is LGBT people, when getting older, getting more mature, how this is considered in this society, that discard people that are older. That's crazy. In this sense, I'd like to invite you all my guests here, to comment the Marcio's video. You will have 2 minutes to comment on this video, your considerations. And I will start with Natasha. Natasha, please, you start. Yes. As I said, in Buenos Aires, we say that the fundamental topic is to work crossing all the section, intersectionality. We have been talking a lot, but we do not know much. We understand in this intersection among problems, and we have the damage and highest difficulties is working in the perspective that is holistic. When you open up a space for gender equality, you open up different spaces, and then you can add up forces to a holistic point of view, taking care and respecting human rights. And there is another point where we approach discrimination points, and it's urgent point to take ahead a public policy plan, intersectorial, in considering oppressions in general, handicap, also racial aspects on gender, everything. In fact, it seems important to have this holistic point of view in different spheres. This year, we have our workshop and training sessions, a workshop of intersectorial organization called Brown Identity, working under the perspective of original people, the sexual diversity, gender identification. And we see when we want to talk about the access, collective right in general, we talk about the access of rights to all people, not a punctual point, but we want to implement diversity as value in our society. So we do not have to approach access of rights of minorities, vulnerable people, but we can understand the society in general, the citizens in general, as heterogeneous with different characteristics. So anyway, about my friend was saying, we understand that sometimes it's important to think about strategies, public policies, observing especially about discrimination so people can access. And in this sense, we work everything related to the access of work for trans people in a specific way, using a holistic program, approaching all the topics, part of this collective of people that historically are more vulnerable, considering the composition LGBTQ. And in this holistic point of view, we say that we need to consider that this historical timeline was enabling different exclusions and access to rights very early. But the situation of that person, of LGBT community that is getting older, is part of what happened before in their trajectory of life. So it's important to have a holistic point of view and approach this very early. Thank you. Thank you so much, Natasha. Himali, you have your 2 minutes to consider about this topic.
Just to be, sorry, to be clear, seniors in particular, or? Yeah.
Isso, exatamente.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe I think I'll center this conversation around intersectionality and how we still have a lot of work to do to not treat our LGBTQI plus community as a monolith, right? And I say that as a person of color who is really factoring in how Black and brown bodies, especially Black and brown queer bodies, are still not as acknowledged within our LGBTQI plus community, and people in color, or sorry, people by Black, Indigenous, and people of color more broadly. By way of senior populations, I'll just say that I think we especially in the global north, have not done enough to acknowledge the unique vulnerabilities and needs of seniors who are LGBTQI plus by way of access to resources. And I think those inequities were relayed particularly bare during COVID-19, where you saw disparities within access to services. I also think we also see it with people who reach out to us for help, that just there's so many barriers to migration for people who are older, for people who have been displaced within their homes, communities, people who have been waiting in refugee camps for years for resettlement. And I think governments need to provide more adequate resources and attention to the unique vulnerabilities and needs of seniors. And as someone who also worked in the field of HIV/AIDS, we mark 40 years since the pandemic was first discovered, and as we kind of deal with another pandemic currently at the same time, we have to reconcile that there's a gap between real resources for folks who've been survivors of the pandemic for decades. And so I think as far as solutions, I think even within the LGBTQI movement and LGBTQI spaces, we have not prioritized the needs of seniors and other vulnerable populations. And I think we need to really center those intersectional communities in our responses.
Perfeito, Himali, muito obrigada.
Perfect, Himali. Thank you so much for your contribution. I believe the sign language interpreter had a technical problem. And then I'd like Javiera comment. Can you comment to your point of view, please? Welcome. Hello, thank you so much. Leandra, thank you for the invitation. What we talked about the video, the Chilean experience, we have several elements that make these seniors people, not only because of their sexuality, not only the LGBTQ community. This is an addition according to the sexuality of senior citizens, and the society chooses and believes there is no sexual activity for them. There is no love, sexual passion, for the advanced age people. In fact, as Natasha said in Kamali, in the LGBT community, the senior citizens are there in this perspective. In Chile, as the organization Mobile, that has serving 30 years for the freedom and equality of rights, we have had some associations with local government. There is no policy whatsoever at a national level in Chile. But as the organization, we have different connections with local government to have conversation and work groups with senior citizens. And then we can discuss their sexuality, not normalize. We can talk about what they feel, because especially the Chilean experience, we are talking about in 1999, we do not have this relation as criminal. So LGBTQ communities suffer the invisibility. They have to hide themselves for many, many years during the dictatorship years, during the period when the homosexual relations were criminalized. So that is a very big important that we have to do in order to help them to advance, especially in their natural expression, so they can be free. In fact, they take up this load that was so strong and so heavy. In this point of view, it is necessary that we, as organizations, as group of civil society, we put the pressure to the government and the states. So we advance in public policies that enable better access to health services, also to have access to information, so they can somehow a late way, because they spend many years of repression, they can advance and getting free. Maybe in the final years of their life, these seniors, they are the population that is so complex. In the follow-up in Chile, we have seniors, people that live alone, they do not have families, and they were rejected for their families because they were gays, lesbians, because of their sexual orientation in the community. So I believe there is a work here that we have to work as individuals and society to generate this visibility, having this forum, conversations, chats with families and friends, and we can advance this way. But yes, especially civil society question the state, so we can advance in public policies that are real, because here in Chile, the circumstances, these policies, that movement are ours, leverage, but there is no general and global policy here in this country, not here. That's very important. That's very important to highlight that. Thank you so much for your contribution. João. Hi, everybody. About this topic, I do not mean to be rude. The feeling that I have is that there are many previous demands to this agenda, especially in the indigenous situation in Brazil, because I'm from Rio Grande do Norte. It's the only state in Brazil that does not have indigenous land demarcated, outlined. So the only state in Brazil that we have this problem. And the land outline, limitation of land, we can have a basic right. The indigenous, we have this land outline, demand, living well. And LGBT agenda is the agenda also of the senior citizens, is somewhere else, like a side, and we have other struggles that are root struggle to get basic rights for the whole population, young people, adult, any gender identity or sex orientation. And we live in a country here in Brazil that does not value not even teachers. And the senior citizens are big masters, are big teachers. So imagine a society that does not value teachers, and a state that is anti-indigenous. How can we reach this agenda in the indigenous, Brazilian indigenous, LGBT, but indigenous, especially seniors? We have a lot ahead of us in the Constitution of 1988. We needed 5 years to mark all indigenous land in Brazil. Everything will be marked in 1993. That's sticking to 1500. We live in a state that is a democratic rehearsal. We do not have a democracy without the indigenous land. In order to reach this point, it's so complicated to talk about my perspective because it seems so far away. We are fighting for vaccine, for food in the communities, and I think about this topic and I get, invisible. We are totally hidden. But we have a lot of fight ahead of us. We count on you to solve it and think about LGBT, struggle, indigenous, and seniors as well. Yeah, it's a process, right, João? It's a process. Janet, to conclude?
Thank you. I think part of what stands out for me listening to everybody is one of my mentors and elders in community, Lee Miracle, talks about Western culture as having an overblown sense of entitlement. And I bring that up because Western culture really represents white systems of how we do business. And our values get so embedded, we forget to see the world from other ways of seeing the world, and we get sucked into this Western world of seeing the world only one way. And I think one of the things, and I recognize, the speaker before me, just like this image back here, as Indigenous people, this is a drop in the middle of an ocean of lived experience of oppression, generations and generations of oppression, not issues, lived experience of oppression. So when you compound that with systems of white privilege and bias, our elders suffer from not getting housing because of homophobia in the city, so they might not get housing. Like, there's lots of reasons why we have to check our personal bias when we're working with human beings in the population, whether we're Indigenous or not, right? Because that's, I think, to Kimali, to your point earlier about the 215 souls that we found, and the number is counting, of children. Indigenous people have always known our children didn't come home from these schools, and now we're finding their little bones and their little remains. What that has done on the world stage is it has given Indigenous populations our humanity back. And whether we're talking about LGBTQ, two-spirit identity, whether we're older, not old, older or mature and looking for love, that's a lifetime journey of all the other things we need. We need housing, we need food, we need clean water. We don't need to just lay these bones to rest. We need to be actively respecting each other's humanity. That's what I hope we get out of this time in our panel, that we won't be forgotten. And thanks to the organizers for listening to me, because I said I will be on your panel, but I won't be the last panel, because I was told this was going to be scheduled last, because I've been last enough. And I feel like the organizers were listening, because we deserve as Indigenous populations to be the first to speak, maybe more often, right? So recognizing that we will not be invisible, just because the world whitewashes everything, we need to go for systemic changes, right? How can we respect each other's humanity? And whether that has to do with housing, food, employment, my sexuality is, I'm lucky if I have a sex slave. Like, it's private. It's none of anybody's business. And the older I get stressed out. I can see the grace. But I'm sure that we will find ways forward to flirt with the world again after the pandemic. But all to say that our sexuality is a private part of who we are. And if we want to make that, like, I wear my little rainbow earrings year round, because I don't just wear them during Pride Month, because I'm proud of my identity year round. That's part of my human packaging and does not just define me. So I know my 2 minutes flies by, but thanks for indulging me that we need more time to respect each other's humanity and not let this Western world of bias define how we should behave, because we have rights that we are hard won at local, national, international levels, and I don't need to be begging for my rights. They're established already.
Muito potente.
That's so powerful. I would like to clarify something. It's so hard to moderate a panel like this. It's very, very hard to conduct a conversation like this one. These meetings, these MOVE structures, these meetings enable us to think about a project that is horizontal, equalitarian. And in 1 hour, we cannot make it. It hurts my heart to give on chat. We have to finalize, we have to wrap up after 2 minutes, you know? I am a young person, and I will connect to the next question. I am a young person, 26, trans, handicapped person. For 9 years, I share my experiences, sexual experiences on internet through erotic short stories, literature, and doing it connect me to women, handicapped women all over the country, no handicapped women as well, men, no handicap, LGBT, trans people, and now they could see themselves in my writing, my erotic writing, possibilities of looking to the mirror and recognize their bodies. In this process, lots of learning going on, and my wish, personal wish, is to listen to you all the time, is to be here learning from you. I learn from you a lot. And when you say 2 minutes, it's too little, not enough time at all, not enough. And I would like to have a seminar with all of you so we can really keep on talking about it and connecting these bonds, creating context, creating network of contacts. We experience a very delicate moment of the pandemic. And the process without the pandemic, a system makes our bodies not to meet, not to exchange heat. And now during the pandemic, this is intensified in a very cruel way. So the process like this, to have a round of conversation, a chat like this, is really a potentializer. Back to talk about the handicap movement, people, when I start in this process, the concern in the network, I hear people personally attacking me. You are a monster, they say. You are an aberration, they say. You are a monster, they say. You are a monster. I was a transvestite, handicap, sharing the sexual experience that I had to empower me. Throughout this process, I learned one of the etymologies of monster, the word is the one who conveys a message, the ones who show something. And then I understand the power of becoming a monster. I understand that I needed to take up this monstruosity, because this monstruosity, that would be a starting point for new lives, new reflections, new perspectives. And then I ask myself, in Brazil, we face a very slow process of autonomy, especially sexuality of the handicapped body, different from other countries in Latin America, where there is this debate of sexual assistance. I'm stuck. I face accessibility problems since the 70s, since the 80s. So as a young person, 26 years old, I do not have time of talk about I need a ramp, I need accessibility. But where are the people, handicapped people in this movement? Where are Natasha in the feminism, women, handicap in the LGBT movement? When we have the Black movement, Kimali, people with handicapped people in the indigenous movement. And then I see how can we connect and intertwine all the invisibilities. That's a question. How do you see invisibilization of handicapped people in society that you live, and how can we also contribute to a collective agenda that is not an individual agenda anymore. The time that we live, we cannot afford thinking about individual agenda anymore. We take up this as a collective agenda, and then we talk and raise this flag together, or we're going to be run over. Just a brief comment. I believe that I have extended a lot. I leave the script. 2 minutes you have now, and I would like to invite to start up João. There is a myth about this perspective of handicapped people, indigenous handicapped people. They say that when a child is born this way, they are sacrificed. And I think this has to do with the construction of this indigenous world, in the singular, the world, endorsed by the romanticism, by the movies and the literature. And we know that this is a way of marginalized the context, indigenous context of agendas that I would call inclusion agenda. In fact, the indigenous community, rural or urban areas, this attention is always collective. I see there is a lot of care, attention with handicapped people in indigenous community. In my territory, Rio Grande do Norte, in Piaçaguera, São Paulo, that is the territory that I work with theater. But I feel there is, as I mentioned, something ahead of that, that until we reach all these boxes, it's so hard, it's so complex to deal with all is this diversity that there is in the indigenous world, as any world, indigenous or non-indigenous. We have so many details, diversity and differences, and it's necessary to ensure something basic before that, the right to the land. So most of people, indigenous people, they have difficulty in taking up as indigenous, in recognize themselves as indigenous, to place this out openly in the world that is not indigenous. And then I think people, they have this difficulty in recognizing as handicapped and indigenous and fight for something, an acknowledgement, when the indigenous aspects are not assured at all. So I feel that within this indigenous movement, inside, things are collectively welcomed, and inside out, people suffer lots of barriers to manifest themselves. And people like you, Leandra, they are a great part of life. So these frontiers, these walls are collapsed. Thank you so much. Thank you. Janet, your contribution, please.
Thank you. I think what stands out is that luckily, what this conversation is really telling us is that it doesn't matter how we're packaged, we're all human beings and get horny. And I just love that we had this brave conversation about how do we engage our disabled community. I have deafness, so part of flirting is hard because I might not get everybody's cues. Like it might be harder to find out if someone's actually two-spirit because I might not hear everything. So that could be a limitation on my end. But just knowing that we want to, remember that when we're speaking English or any European language, and Spanish would be rooted in a European language, and so would Portuguese, what we're dealing with are split relationships. That's how they're organized linguistically. You talked about the monster, which was a very brave comment, because you're either, good or evil. I'm not sure what the opposite of monster would be, like human. I don't know what, there's just this split. You're either you fit in or you don't. And when you don't conform, that's where we get the ugly titles and the ugly or like the nasty and cruel ways of labeling each other. We lose our humanity again because we get wrapped up in the enemy's tongue. Beauty and the Beast, you know, whether you're married or single or mother or maiden, like, you know, you get stigma for lots of different reasons because of these split relationships. And I bring that up because, again, we need to find a way to see the world and our humanity in bigger lens than this narrow Western way of this or that. Be normal or you're not. We get clumped into other because we haven't not committed to conform. Because why should I? Like, I tried to get married 3 times. Okay, I struck out 3 times. I'm not going to try a 4th time. I don't hook up with men. It's not my thing. But I can say I tried because as a little girl, I was told that's what I had to do. If I had seen more lesbian moms or more people with disabilities, wheelchair and people walking together, like more, you know, couples that might not look Hollywood, I would see more diversity, and that's happening a little bit more. So recognizing that we invite people who are in wheelchairs to our events where we're going to be maybe flirting with each other, or, you know, I have DJs that I follow who have music I like to listen to. So maybe I could suggest to my DJs, make sure you have a ramp. So if anyone shows up with a wheelchair, they can bust a move with us. Like, we could think about that in our planning. And I think that's what this conversation helped me see, is that it's important to recognize that we all could be welcome, every member of our human, you know, people, however we're packaged, you know, in a wheelchair, able-bodied, lots of ways of engaging with each other, just by recognizing we deserve to play in the same sandbox without labels. And that's hard to do when we're speaking in English and Spanish and Portuguese, because you're either this or you're that, good or evil, blah, 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 right? So recognizing when we see a different world that respects each other's humanity, we can write our relationships in lots of wonderful ways.
Com certeza, com certeza.
Certainly. Kimali?
Yeah, I'm trying to reflect on what to add here. I think one of the things I've been thinking about with this conversation, especially from Canada, that operates out of Canada, the United States, and that works in international development spaces and works on migration and on these intersection issues, is we can't solve these issues in an intersectional way unless we change the makeup of the people who wield power. So me being a queer Black man at the head of an international development agency in multiple countries is a very rare thing. Like, this is the most diverse panel I've been on in ages, and we would probably be the most diverse panel I'll be on in ages. I talk to white people all the time as part of my job, and I talk to cisgender white people who have access to the resources that are going to tackle these issues, and that's the part that I think about a lot, especially within my own government, where it's great that the embassy, our Canadian embassy, that is more diverse, is hosting this forum. But in many cases, again, it's because of the way our bureaucracy works. It's people who are white and privileged and centered who end up yielding responsibility to tackle some of these intersectional issues. And so what I think about in my role a lot is, how do we dismantle that? Like, how do I push the government to yield space and center our global LGBTQI movement is really awkward because it's filled with many fierce activists who are my friends who are really diverse, from and I hate using global north, global south, but for the context of this conversation, people who are in Western countries who interact with these spaces with governments with more resources are almost always white. no, almost white and cisgendered, and they're not dealing with issues of indigeneity or disability or multiple spectrums of sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics. So I, every time I am in these spaces, I get motivated to continue pushing on. I feel that I'm one of the few. I'm a few, and even then, even my Canadian bornness is a privilege from coming from the Jamaican. My mom's Jamaican, my dad's Cuban. Me being born in here versus my siblings give me immense privilege in this space, and so I think I think all of you, the people who know the most, are given the least amount of resources to tackle these issues. And how do we correct that imbalance is something I think about often.
Thank you so much. I will invite Javiera. Javiera, your turn. Thank you so much. Well, I believe that one of the biggest challenges that we face now is generating intersectorial communities, especially in Chile, the perspective of standard. There are laws that fight discrimination. In 2012, that was this law approved by the pressure of the LGBT community, this law to be used for different parts of discrimination, political ideology, discapacity, discrimination, different reasons. So we have a standard that came from the LGBT community and nowadays is used to protect from the discrimination any person in Chile. But this is just in paper. It's reactive. You have to be discriminalized first in order to use the law and protect your rights. I believe our biggest challenge is in the civil society to generate communities, intersectorial communities, using alliances and partnerships. It's necessary that we see each person as individual in their universality. We are unique and complex human beings. And then I believe we have to learn how to observe ourselves as equals in our differences. We all worth the same. And I believe this work, we have to do it in the organizations, in our communities, in our surrounding, so we can advance in the cultural aspect, social aspect, and following the laws. This is not enough because the discrimination is here and will exist until we do not generate this visibility, that our children, our adolescents can access to the knowledge of diversity, the knowledge that are different kinds of people, different natures, and at the end, we are valuable human beings and we contribute to the society. I believe this is the biggest challenge that we can face, but we need to overcome these differences with the acknowledgement, with the observation and the understanding that each one of this person is worth. And they are not because of their package, but who they are. They can contribute, they can create, and they can share. And to conclude this panel, this question, Natasha, it's your turn. Thank you, Leandra. I was thinking about that in a reflection because, in fact, we talked about different topics that we need to think about. We need more time. We talk about intersectorial, LGBT, the original people. It seems that it's too much. It's so encompassing, but I think, as Janet, what she said make me think that in reality, a possible way would be do not place people in a standard, in a policy, in a system that is formed this way already for a standard that this old, is ancient and really limiting, and also think about standards and a system that is related to people, real citizenship that is diverse, that we are all of us with our own characteristics, with our own cultures that is so diverse, our corporalities. When we understand that diversity is a value and it should be valued as potentializer of society, cities, policies, then we find also bigger benefits to everybody. I think that I thank you so much for this space. I would love to see you in another moment as well, so we can talk more about it. It seems that in the privileges that we have, the place that we occupy, our responsibility is to bring light to those people that face higher difficulties to access their rights. Now the people should have the same rights, but we know that in practice things are not this way. So this is my commitment, this is my position. I'm here willing to work together with you. So we move ahead with this conversation and reflection. Thank you so much. And this is just the beginning. We are going to get connected. We are exchange experience. We follow each other in the social network. And this is a potential, a really potential. And according to our script, that is almost finishing, also all the struggle of recognition and the access for recognition as LGBT, they need to prove. Some people need to prove their sexuality, as is the case of bisexual people. For many people, bisexual are undecisive and need to choose sides. Even inside the LGBT community, this speech is recurring. How can we break this myth of bisexual people? They are not confused. They do not need to choose sides, and they should be respected in and outside the LGBT community. I'd like to invite Javiera to answer this in 5 minutes. She has 5 minutes. Wonderful. This myth about bisexuality is very complex. It affects your identity. I consider a pansexual person. Originally, since the adolescence, it was so hard to know who I was because I like women, I like men, but I like people. I do not have different preferences, and you are confused, you are heterosexual, you are curious, but it's so complex to determine who you are, your identity. The most important part, so we can advance, people that we consider pansexual, we can express that. We can explain there is not a confusion, it's just other kind of sexual orientation where we feel strongly attracted by different kinds of people. Could be a trans, could be a cis person, could be a bisexual person. In the end of the day, I believe the most important aspect in order to overcome this myth of bisexuality is a confusion, is to explain, and we can bring to knowledge where you develop since the adolescence, for example. You explain to our adolescents in workshop, conversation, in forums like this, social network, in different instances, the most quantity of people. So this information gets to different people, especially adolescents that are starting up their sexual lives. They understand that's a reality, that you can have preferences for a certain identity or another without being confused, because you observe people, you observe individuals that in the end of the day, what you attract is their internal formation, who they are as people. I believe the most important is to get this knowledge. Young people need knowledge. When I was adolescent, I did not know bisexuality or pansexuality up to after 18 years old. When I started university, I started studying, I get to know more people. It was in a small town in Chile, southern region, Patagonia, and I did not have visibility of people like me, not even gay people, lesbian. In fact, my daily life was so far away from our reality. The most important aspect is we can share our realities and generate spaces like this. So everybody that is forming their sexual identity and getting to know them, to know how they want to express themselves. And they need to know different realities so they can have somehow examples, role models. They understand the diversity. If I know a person that is bisexual, I know a person that is pansexual, I know a person that is lesbian or gay, this is important that young people can see them, visualize them, because the reality does not exist because they don't talk about that at home, on TV they do not see it, it's very restricted with some productions of some platforms that make this visibility, but not everybody can access that. In fact, on daily lives, young people do not have this visibilization, they do not know their reality. So I believe this is very important so they can support, we can support them in this discovery of people, because young people suffer not only victimization, but also they suffer for themselves. They do not know how to determine themselves. They have conflict on their identities. So when you see there are people that live the same reality, somehow it generates a connection because you say, I'm not alone. This is something that other people share and experience. I'm not strange. I'm not a strange person. So I believe this is very important that we ourselves show ourselves out and help in our organizations. These young people can see ourselves, they get to know different realities, and in the end of the day, more than the labels, we can see ourselves as human beings and people. Thank you so much for your contribution. Really relevant to talk about divergences as well in the movement. All these questions of bisexuality, pansexuality, it is something that is questionable among ourselves. We need to debate this. Thank you so much, really. Now, we have a video of Regiane Abreu, Mothers of Diversity. Mothers by Diverse develop a work that welcome families talking about LGBT children. Let's watch the video. Thank you so much. I am Regiane. I am Mothers for Diversity. I have a trans child, 12-year-old. I am here to talk to you about my experience as a mother of a trans child in our family, and also other families and other children that are trans, talking about diversity, to let you know our experience, our is invisibilized, is demeaned, is decreased. Most of the times, we, parents of trans children, we hear from family members and strangers as well. If this was my child, I would not let that happen. Our children, most of the times, when they try to express themselves, their willingness, their need to be, we silence our children based on ignorance because we did not know. We did not know about this vocabulary. We did not know that the child, LGBT child, we parents, we did not know that this child could exist, let alone exist in our houses. We learned a lot from our experiences. Our children suffered a lot as well. The trans child, very early, they know what prejudice is, they know difficulties such as go to the toilet, they understand the need of having networks so they can transit in some environment. We parents as well, we need to put up an architecture so our children can use different spaces, also the spaces at school, the educational spaces, also in healthcare. We suffer violence in different professional areas, in different environments. Mothers for Diversity is here to tell you that this child exists, is here to say that we, family members, we exist. Mothers for Diversity, when it embraces her, when we reach to mothers normally, we are so pain, so hurtful, we are sad, we are unhappy. That's true. When we are welcomed and we see ourselves as equals, a new road opens up. We have to, in this exchange among families, mothers and fathers, children of all ages as mothers and families, the challenge change throughout life. And thank God we have the support in mothers and this support on mothers that give their face, that show that our families exist, our children exist and deserve to be respected. So I give you all a kiss. Get well, you wear masks and vaccination. Yes. See you later. That's so nice. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the contribution. And now I ask for my honorable guests for their brief comment about children, LGBT children in this scenario. Janet, would you like to start?
I'm a two-spirit mom, and I had to come out to my youngest boy because I left my third marriage, and he didn't know this about me, but his older brother and sister did. So I showed him a picture of all the different ways we could see family, men and women together, and all these other ways of being together. So sort of back to the bisexual comments earlier too, you know, we're not looking for converts in general. Like, I think there's this fear that the gay community is a threat. And I think Western culture forgets itself. Western culture wants everybody else to conform, not, you know, and they're assuming that they're going to be treated the same way. Well, when my Catholic friend put her hand on my knee after I came out, she put her hand on my knee and said, "I'm not lesbian." And I said, "That's okay, because I'm not attracted to all women." So there's just, people forget themselves, that they think that somehow the LGBTQ2 spirit community is going to play the same tricks as Western culture, is you've got to do things my way. No, you do you, I do me. And when it comes to our families, my child was so accepting of me. Sometimes you'll see me with a woman, sometimes you might see it is what it is. Love, is what our children grew up with. And my two older children, they shrugged. We know, mommy, we know. They love me for who I am. And we're not looking for converts, for the record. And that makes flirting even harder, because I don't want all the women friends in my life to think I'm preying on them. Like, I'm not. You got to be mutually attracted, as our previous speakers spoke. It's energy, it's an exchange, it's mutual. It's not me being lesbian, being a vulture. Maybe, you know, that's Western culture's agenda, to make people conform and do a thing a certain way. Just because somebody is straight doesn't mean the gay community wants to make them gay, but the straight community seems bent on trying to make us straight. Well, read between the lines, like, that's not going to happen. Like, I'm not going to stand up and be tall to somebody else's drumbeat. I have to be honest with myself, because in Indigenous teachings in this region, the difference between honesty and truth is LGBTQ identity exists, and families with gay parents, that we exist. Trans children, they exist. They're lovable just the way they are. And I think what we need to respect is that we have to find more ways to celebrate our humanity and let our private lives be private and not be threatened by the LGBTQ community, because we're just expressing our humanity. And what I do privately is just as private as what straight people do private. Some of the stories they tell me, I don't want to hear. What I do private is a birthright. That's the difference between a secret. So I was honest with my children. So honesty is the conversation we have with ourselves. Truth is what we speak to everybody else. And honesty is the conversation we have with ourselves. That's why I came out, because I wasn't being honest with myself. I had to come out so I could be my whole self. And I feel better standing in my truth and being honest. I feel more balanced. And I think my children benefit. I wish I had a partnership right now, but all to say I love myself until I find a partner. All to say my children see me as a lovable, healthy human being in whatever partnership I'm in.
Muito bom, muito bom. Bem brevemente.
That's great. That's great. We are running out of time. I'd like to invite Javiera. In reality, the trans children in general, it's something that had been a taboo for many years. They suffered very big discrimination, especially in Chile. The trans is not, it's recently used. It was kind of an insult. So very recently is not a disease. So in fact, we have to advance a lot in this reality, this knowledge and understand. As Janet said, I am a mother. I have a 4-year-old child. And in fact, the biggest part of my work is that he understands that we are not black or white. We are fluid human beings with different realities, and there are people that are born with a physical sexuality, but they have other sexuality inside. It's not explaining the hegemonic perspective, cis, white, heterosexual, but they have to understand there is a world of diversity, and the children get to know it. In Chile, very recently, for 2 years, there was this law approved. So people over 18 years old not only register their name differently, but also surgical interventions, because it was not permitted before that, including as well digital sexuality change of people minor, underage. They cannot have surgery. But as an advance anyway, it's an advance in the standard, but we have to advance in the cultural aspect, social aspect, and these children can be part of their community at school, and the school community can understand what they are talking about, because the fear is based on not knowledge, not knowing. As the organization of civil society, we have to leverage higher access to information and the educational communities, schools, especially in Chile, there is a big load of private schools associated to Catholic region. In fact, that is so complex when they take up this reality. So I believe the biggest challenge to generate spaces of information, so eradicate discrimination generated for lack of knowledge, because fear is generated from the lack of knowledge. I believe this is the most important part, to educate all the community and work together with mothers and fathers of these trans children so we can advance. And the acknowledgement, these are normal children, that they have a different reality. But this is a natural reality that exists in our society. We do not see them as a mistake, as an error. When we educate our children now, we educate them in, you are a man, so you like women. You are a woman, so you like men. And in fact, that's not how it works, because the perspective, educational perspective, the diversity is an error. It's not natural. So we have to fight this, not only as parents, but also as activists. Thank you. I'd like to invite. And we are fighting against. Oh, Kimali, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, it's you, sir. Kimali.
Oh, yeah, look, I am mindful of the time. I think, I think like when I think about children and youth, I feel a lot of hope. I also feel a lot of concern. I feel a lot of hope that when we talk, the folks who get intersectionality the most are younger people, and I think when I hear about people's understanding of their identities and the need for intersectionality of identities, I feel really hopeful around youth in general. I also feel that I am concerned about, a lot of places where young folks are still subject to conversion therapy. They're still subject to practices where they're displaced because of sexual orientation or gender identity. Also feel that they are going to, from an intersectional lens, I think one of the things I think about a lot is climate, and that they are going to face a lot of the intersectional burden around LGBTQI identities and climate. So we get a lot of requests for help from folks who are under the age of 18 who talk about their experiences of what it's like to be displaced from their families and get kicked out of their family home because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so there's, in some aspects, there's a lot of promise, and in certain areas, and there's in the immediate term, we need to ensure that there's enough resources to protect queer children, young adults who are displaced.
That's it. Thank you so much. Thank you. And now to conclude this session, before concluding, Janet.
I thought I spoke already, but I was just thinking that prioritizing queer families in our
Sim, desculpa. Eu errei no roteiro, meu Deus.
I'm so sorry, I got it wrong. Too many things to manage. I'm so sorry. Dear Lord, João, it's your turn. I'm so sorry, Janet, really sorry.
O tempo é muito curto e é muito difícil, assim, falar nesse tempo curtinho, assim, eu tenho a mente muito confusa, mas eu acho que para finalizar sobre hoje, sobre essa questão da invisibilidade, e fomos nesse
about the invisibility and these people and mothers as well. There is a point that is so relevant in my mind when you talk about monster. This was so strong to me, so strong. And we really have to think about the invisibility is just a choice, not a condition. And then I remember when I learned that monster is about to show up, and the grotesque is the hidden, is inside the cave. And when you talk about it, that you recognize as a monster, I believe it's interesting. There is this paradox that we live, especially all the minorities, that is deny this humanity because the project, humanistic project, is eugenic project. When the humanity was created, there is a dehumanization as well. White people, European are humans, the Black and the indigenous are not. So let's take our religion to them. Let's show heterosexuality to them, all the standard that is correct, that is a humanity. This is very important to deny and rebuild humanity. And this concept of humanity now, it's a meeting of diversity of people, because monstruosity is these layers of what is straight as a soft as a standard. Mothers taking up their children, children taking up themselves, handicapped and seniors. They leave their caves to leave the invisibility just when necessary, just when they want. That's everyone's struggle. In order to conclude the topics of our struggle, so we can really have this invisibility as a choice and not a condition. Kisses to everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so happy. Tara Williamson from Canada, a friend of mine, a kiss to you. And to conclude, our next guest is Natasha. Thank you so much. I get many things when you say, I take notes, I share and I adhere with Javi the approach of childhood, trans childhood, and this approach of diversity since childhood, this early childhood is crucial. And then we do not see so much disparity and excess of rights in the adult life. And it's important in the city of Buenos Aires to follow families, call families that is diverse family, but in reality, all the families are diverse. To follow these families in this transition of the childhood and adolescence. In March this year, the city of Buenos Aires, we signed up a commitment letter with the organization to follow up these families, support and assist these families, diverse families, childhood and adolescence, because it seems fundamental. Also institutionally to approach the school systems, community systems, sports systems, also the inclusion, real inclusion, and the freedom of all the people since the very beginning of their lives. So it seems that it's very interesting and very rich, this debate, also respecting the monstrosity. It seems that the monster and the aberration in the humanity is this perspective that we just have the things that I see, that's my place, but I do not represent and consider the richness of diversity that people have. So in reality, it seems that that's the only monster that exists. And that's it. I share different opinions and different perspectives and need to enlarge this debate for different topics that we approached here. Because it seems when we see this idea of gender, of a certain corporality, when we want to place culture in a single box, we see the film, and this is against everybody because we are made of in a broad way, diverse way, and we are part of different collectives. And this is rich, this is beautiful in the world. So I'd like to thank you, Leandra, for this space and greet you all. You know, dear God, I'm so sad I have to conclude this session, this panel. No, I do not want that. I have to conclude this panel. Production, help me. I have 2 hours. I have 2 hours with them. Let me know, please. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. Really, thank you so much for your participation. We are wrapping up this panel. I'd like to thank you so much for your attendance, your presence, each and every one of you, my dear guests, Natasha, Kimali, Janet João, Javiera. 2022, I'd like to see you in person. Invite me. Gigant and monsters. I would like to see monsters. And 10 a.m. tomorrow, BRT. We are getting back with LGBT rights and 2+ to talk about LGBT in politics. Here on YouTube channel of Parada São Paulo. Do not miss, it's a great honor and a great pleasure to mediate this debate. Thank you so much and follow us on social network. Kisses, kisses.